Um, I think it was about 2 years ago, or possibly 3 years ago, you seemed to radically change your materials. You know, you wanted to continue working three-dimensionally, but you, for various reasons, you had to find a different material to work with. And having sort of found that material, what did it trigger in you? What did it sort of offer a new sort of form language, or what sort of opportunities did it give you?
The new material basically was, I think you're alluding to, is the gourds, and the gourds were found for various reasons. I mean, the most astonishing part of it was that it seemed to be a kind of a ready-made found form that seemed exactly like my drawing language, so that it was as if I had already been, like somehow nature had somehow combined its actions or its formations with somehow rhythms that I had been feeling, you know. So, and what I've always kind of questioned the labor that went into work for some reason. I don't know exactly why, but I think it, you know, like you spend a lot of time working and building and tearing down and building back up and things like that, and somehow the idea that something presents itself and seems like already given was always very provocative to me. So this was a form that seemed to be a given. You know, it seemed to be kind of handed to me. So, and it was also very, very light. You know?
Right. So in a sense, your drawings is what sort of enabled you to recognize this.
Recognize, absolutely, yeah. I would have never had the conviction of to choose this material unless I had been drawing for years and years and years the way I've been drawing. And mainly that was a kind of a lyrical, abstract, biomorphic language. And that always seemed the most natural to me. Like whenever I wanted to just begin or get myself going, I would just start drawing, you know. And that drawing would always form a certain kind of characterization that seemed very much like the shape of gourds and biomorphism.
Yeah, it seems a little bit that, and I maybe, you know, I'm not sure, but with the gourd forms that you initially started building, it seemed like you were really enjoying the sort of fitting together of these different components.
Right.
And it seemed to have a little more of a linear rhythm to it than a sort of more compact sort of, I mean, it was still organic, but it seemed to be sort of more drawn in space rather than constructing.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, because for one thing, the density of the material when you construct sometimes gives it a burden of engineering, you know, that seems to slow it down maybe. And these gourds were so light, and they seemed to just kind of, you know, move around in space so effortlessly. So it was just a matter of cutting and combining and, you know, and listening to, you know, how far you could go with this particular set of gourds, or, you know, or lining them up this way or that way. And their lightness allowed them to kind of like exist in space so much easier. You know, of course, my own physical needs at that time made me want to find light materials anyhow, because I couldn't lift more than maybe 20 pounds. So, you know, that ratified that as well.
Right. It seemed that this lightness also seemed to sort of have this notion of, I mean, we've sort of joked in the past about, you know, well, the nice thing about painting is you don't really have to worry about gravity.
Right, yeah.
Whereas when you're constructing three-dimensional things, you're always concerned about gravity, and particularly things falling, you're going to hurt you.
Right.
with the gourds, they seem to sort of have a sense of elevation.
Yeah,
And I think that's really echoed in the sculpture.
yeah, that's good. Yeah, yeah. No, I like that. Yeah, and then the interesting thing was like, once I would get a piece and it seemed to exist, then I'd have to find out, well, where is it in space, and how do I hold it up? And even though it's light, it still could fall down.
Right.
So then I had to figure out a base, and the base always has such a kind of negative history in modernism, because it seems to be like it shouldn't be necessary.
Right. It's just supporting something else.
Right, and so it's kind of like the frame to a painting.
Right.
No one frames their painting anymore, so it's kind of like it seems unnecessary, And so I had to think about that for a little bit, but what I found was that the character of the work seemed to need a support system that really had a sense of dependency to it, so that it wasn't the character of it really shouldn't have been independent, because there was a sense of heroics about wanting things to exist in space without support, and from ground up, etc. And a lot of things that interest me are actually grounded. They actually get to the floor, or they drop you down in terms of what you look at. So I didn't really have an anathema or a problem with the base, and so I went out and I decided to use iron or have somebody build these bases for me. So I had to design what they were, and I liked that idea, and also it was a new idea for somebody to actually build these for me too, because I would always build everything for myself, pretty much. So this was Doug Wagner who did the ironwork, and each one had to be kind of manufactured for each gourd form, and then it would find its place in space. And then it had to be white, because it would be, not only was there a kind of medical overtone slightly, but also it kind of diffused the reality of it, in a white, and generally a white gallery, if you paint things white, then it tends to, diffuse its impact.
Well, it seemed to have like a real contrast. It seemed to have a sense of architecture that was very much in contrast to the structure of the gourds.
Yeah.
Even in the earlier ones, which always still seemed to be wall mounted, you chose materials that, again, like copper or plexiglass, that seemed to be in real contrast to the sort of indigenous nature of the gourd form language. The other thing that I was curious about was, and it sort of surprised me this morning when we talked very briefly about your experience of a deer in Beacon. I hadn't realized that the Michael Heiser pieces, or maybe many of the pieces up in the minimalism of it, had such a profound effect on you.
Yeah.
It makes so much sense now when I think about the spheres that you did for your last show at Joni's.
Right.
And how you could trust that simplicity,
right,
which perhaps 10 years ago you would not have done.
No, never.
So you want to talk a little bit about that sort of experience?
Well, the spheres were something that were not in this show, but they were in the Joni show during the summer show, and that was very much a radical kind of departure in some ways, but it had its continuum. But the simplicity of those 4 spheres were actually, I think, chosen actually before I went to Beacon. But then were ratified in terms of my feeling about it, because I lived with those for almost 2 years and didn't know what the hell to do with them.
Oh.
You know, Peregrine had put me onto them, you know. And she said, "Hey, look, there's something in the alley I think you need." You know, and I said, "What? I need more stuff, you know?"
Is that like the semi parts too?
Yeah.
Is it the same deal with the semi parts?
Yeah, it was kind of like, you know, like they were just material that seemed to present themselves that, you know, that people thought, you know, that boy you could use, you know. And so then I'd take them home and I said, well, that's nice that they think I can use them, but I don't know what to do with them, you know. So they sat around and sat around. I would bring one in and I would, you know, like maybe think of cutting it and adding a thing or use it as a base and, you know, maybe make 4 different pieces or, you know, or all kinds of stuff, you know. And every time it just seemed wrong. So then more and more it was kind of like, it is what it is, you know, and how can I allow it to be what it is and still
do something.
marry it to my own inclinations or something, you know. How can I basically maybe least manipulate it, you know, rather than engage it more, you know, expressionistically or, you know, in that way. You know, how can I stand back and, you know, allow it to be? So then I thought about, well, they needed to be, you know, painted, they needed to be, and then they needed these boxes, you know, and the boxes were the box car, and they were called the box car. And so the box car radiated into the movement of inmates in concentration camps, you know, and the boxcars in the German camps, etc. So that tied it to that. Boxcars also throwing dice, you know, which you get boxcars, you know, which I think there's like 4 dots or something like that. And then, you know, so there are all these overtones in terms of the concept, and they seem to, you know, ratify that idea. So then we manufactured, and that was Happy and myself manufactured those Happy Rice in those boxes, and we made those. And the plexiglass was very expensive plexiglass, like $300 a sheet or something. Which I never go out and buy usually, but I did. And I said, this is beautiful stuff, I gotta have it. You know, and so there's this kind of edge that seems to be an electric edge to it, you know, and so it seemed to have its own energy, you know, just in terms of its light. So, but I had to be very, very precise about how I'd use it because it was so expensive, you know, so I would make these boxes and get so much out of it. And then that continued into the gourds where, you know, certain ones had the boxes in them where they would be the energy conduit, you know, between the iron, which was the base, and then the gourd that would be the biomorphic. You know, so it's kind of like there's 3 phases in there.
It seems that during this period, like say middle of 2003 and most of 2004, there was this real push working with the gourd forms, and they seemed to sort of grow exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
Where was painting at this time for you?
I did I think 1 or 2 paintings, but it was kind of like off to the side. You know, there's one painting that'll be at the Dolphin Gallery that's
Is that white ash?
yeah, white ash, yeah. And that was done, it was really a floor piece, and it was just done, the main thing was a big swirl that of ashen kind of cool gray color, that kind of a celadon-like color almost, and I would walk around the canvas with a paint roller, and it just kind of inscribed this this kind of whirling like form in the middle, and the form seemed so correct, you know, somehow adjusting to whatever else I was doing. And it took me, and then I put it aside for a while and didn't do anything and hung it on the wall. And then it was much later that there were certain little tweaks at the bottom of the canvas that I did, where there was the ovens that did a kind of 4-dimensional medieval space, and then the tree trunks that were all broken on a sphere. They were very much like another piece I was doing in sculpture, where I found these little like poured aluminum trees that would be manufactured for model train sets.
Mm. Mm.
You know, I always liked that. I really liked that. And they kind of came out of broken limbs. You know, broken tree limbs are the same as broken body limbs.
Oh.
So the trees were really metaphors for the body as well.
But there was a radical scale change with those. They're very tiny, both in the
Very,
painting
very tiny.
and in the sculpture.
Yeah.
What was your thinking there?
Well, I just sat on the floor in this painting, and I just did each little tree. You know, and it was very, very kind of almost meditational.
Oh, so it's about that intimacy?
Yeah, very. You know, I was right up, sitting on the floor with the teeniest of brushes. You know, I just did these teeny little trees because I thought that the smaller I could get them and the more I could get them, the bigger the round form would be. You know, in contrast. So.
Well, it is a strange space in that painting. I mean, it seems to like push out and come and go back, almost at the same time. Yeah,
well, I didn't want to interrupt that. You know, I wanted to do something on the bottom that connected it to my ideas, but I didn't want to interrupt the pulse of that.
It sort of reminded me a little bit of a gas bellows that you showed me in your studio years ago. This bladder.
Yeah.
That was both contracting and expanding.
Right.
And in a funny way, that painting had a similar sort of pulse or breathing to it, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, those bellows I think came out of gas meters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which seemed sort of again incongruous when you think of like the exterior of a gas meter, this sort of tin or this metal, and then inside it was this very delicate sort of membrane.
Yeah. Well, you have to open it up, or you'll never know.
Right. when you're working on when you had such a rhythm going with your sculptures, is it hard for you to paint?
No, I don't. I don't really remember. You know, it being any more difficult or easier.
You just got really involved in this certain
just
group
in
of
the
materials.
in this and also we were taking these trips down to southern Missouri, you know, to the gourd farms, and it was a nice little break and kind of vacation for, you know, Catherine and I to, you know, get down there and take a day away and, you know, and then go find the material, because it's funny, you kind of keep going to, like, you know, art materials and, you know, back to the same place, you know, for the same materials, and in a way that kind of dictates so much, you know. And so if you know, change just where you're getting your materials, then your whole beginnings kind of change, you know. And it's like you're not going to the art store anymore, you know, for the same brushes or the same this or that.
So you're going to different places, and in a sense, meeting
Totally
also
different places, different people. You know, your intuitive reactions about what's right or wrong is, you know, totally up for grabs. You know, just choosing. When you get to a gourd farm, there's tons of rows and rows of like all these gourds laid out, and there's like thousands of them, you know. And so why are you picking this one over that one, you know? And you got to pick them up, and you know, some of the walls are too thin, so that's no good. Won't make it, won't hold up. You know, the character of it just seems ordinary or something like that, and so you just start, you know, picking and choosing. Well, this is more eccentric, or this feels like, you know, a certain piece or section that you really want to turn a corner on, or something like that, you know. And then we would just fill the back of our SUV.
And mine also.
And yours too. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and pack them in there and take them back to the studio. And then you know, you take them in the studio, and then you'd have to bleach and wash each one.
Right.
So then it's like taking a little like baby's belly or something, you know, and rubbing it or something, you know, like a Ganesh, you know, like on the you know, the belly of the Ganesh, was it which Indian god is that? That's the one with the elephant. The elephant.
Oh,
you know,
the Shiva.
Yeah, no, I think it's the Ganesh, but but he stands up there kind of like this or something, you know, and he's got this wonderful belly, you know, in Indian sculpture,
Oh,
and
right.
it's all you can do not to go
Just
up and want to, you know, put your hand around it, you know. Well, these gourds are just like that, so you're kind of like cleaning them and, you know, and getting them ready, you know, and stuff. So you do that, and then dry them out and everything, and you know, it's got this certain process that you got to go through.
Hmm.
I have to ask about just the color, because every time I've seen you, you got the color on.
The green,
yeah, and
so,
it's in your you know, your sculptures as well. And
yeah.
just going over the video and seeing you with the sculptures, you can't help but like seeing, you know, connections between
Right.
the two on personal.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like what happened. What happened was I had to go into this customizer, you know, to auto customizer to do the shells, the semi truck shells, and he said, well, you know, what color, you know, and all of a sudden it's kind of like in painting, you have a rhythmic color that has a kind of sound to it, you know, and you're in a particular zone, you know, so you're using it in a way which one kind of calls up the other, you know, you don't
Right.
really have to mentally have an idea about it, you know, in that way. So it's a kind of visual phenomena that calls up, you know, and just like a sound will call up another sound, you know, and so it seems like an automatic kind of reach. But this was a thing where, okay, here's books like this, you know, and they're all lined out, and there's tons of like, you know, thousands of colors that are available to you, you know. So why this one over that one? And you know, and he wants to know, and he says, okay, what color? You know, and so, you know, I go through it, and then I realized that over the last few years that VW Golf 2001, you know, it was startling to me when it came out. You know, beautiful color, and it went through our streets and everything else, and it had a kind of eccentricity to it that I really liked, and it was a cyber green. So the one I chose was this VW 2001 cyber green, and it was one that came out. And the other reason is that I was always kind of aware of night vision goggles and that kind of you know thing that we see on TV, where you you know, like see war through this kind of acidy green, you know, and it's kind of like brings up the video game kind of like mentality of the war, you know, and so, you know, where are we shooting, where are we hitting, where the near misses, you know, is it all technical? Well, who's excused for this or that, for, you know, having a near miss or having friendly fire, you know what I mean? So all these problems come up ethically, and so that's locked to that color, you know, and so that was embedded in it. So there was some reinforcement that way as an idea.
For me, I guess, like, I always saw it as, people think of green as like the natural color of nature,
Right.
you know, and here are these natural gourd forms, but they've been manipulated and then painted a green, but even the green is like an artificial version
Right.
of the nature.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely artificial,
Yeah.
and you know, technical, and but it's a curious thing. The way, especially in the semi-truck forms, there's such a gorgeous beauty about the iridescence and pearlescence, you know, looking through that surface, you know. So there's definitely a sensual sense to that, you know, and they're able to pull it off, you know, really beautifully. And then in the small ones, I have a person, manufacturer who can put it in little cans, so I can do my own that way. But I can't quite get the luminosity that they can get in the customizer, like Wild Chalk can do. Jim Green, he's like really does magic that way.
I wanted to ask you a few questions about the latest piece, the Issachar's Surveillance. Again, the sort of contradiction, or maybe not the contradiction, maybe the contrast between seeing it at a distance, where you have this very convincing sort of minimalist form, and again, it seems to sort of relate to some of the things you talked about with, you know, the Adir experience.
Right.
But then on the other side of that is when you walk up to the piece, you gaze in the interior. There's a whole different sort of
Right.
issue involved there, and where you start to talk about risk society again.
Right.
Maybe you could sort of talk a little bit about how those contrasts came about for you.
Yeah. Well, the definitely I had in my mind was the and actually that installation could be even in a bigger space, because you could come upon it, from all different sides and a
Right.
greater distance actually. So, I think of that as a kind of almost museum scale, installation. But definitely its authority as a form, I felt was very complete. Like where the two shells really mirrored each other, and they then had this kind of spherical entrance or hole that from far away you may see elliptically, kind of like just as a thin slice,
Right.
And then as you got up to it, that ellipse would then slowly open up as your gaze would become upon it. And definitely that was in the interior of that, or complexity and the narrative even, and the kind of emotional content, things like that were maybe antithetical to what might happen at the Beacon or something like that in terms of minimal reaction. But I felt that that's where my own personality and my own interest really even came into play, maybe more radically, so that I could marry those two ideas, so that the complexity and the humanization and the sense of more, because all of those chords had much more, not only biomorphic form, but anthropomorphic
Right.
identity.
Right.
So therefore they were much more like bodies,
Mhm.
and they were definitely bodies that were torn apart, they were marred, they were maimed, they were somewhat grotesque in some ways, and had leftover scars, etc. And so then I wanted to do the fabric piece underneath them that then ratified the concentration camp stripes, uniforms, and then also the Guantanamo orange, which then kind of brought it into our own realm symbolically, so that it wasn't any one period that I was talking about, but basically the overall humiliation or degradation of the human body and what it's gone through in many instances. So that kind of, and then the surveillance really had to do with this sense of having a light bathe over, and especially like in the camps where you would have these searchlights that would give this enormous kind of tension, to, how can you get across that field? Is it going to be seen? Can you make it?
Right.
Can you get to the gate? Can you, etc. And this light would then bathe these bodies and have a potential of movement where the might all of a sudden stand up and get out of there, or it may release or something, but it definitely gave a certain edge to the light and the form that was in there. I thought kind of opened the form up from being just a very kind of passive thing there. It had to be lit, but it had to be lit in a way that would give a certain tension.
Yeah, because that seemed to sort of activate like a sense of time. Mm-hmm. It almost became like an equivalent to, in a sense, of video, where you, in standing there experiencing it, the light interrupted you,
right.
Or the light either interrupted you or it gave you like a passage to sort of explore the sculpture.
Yeah. Yeah, and then Issachar, that was kind of funny. When I was in the hospital, a rabbi kept visiting me, and a Hasidic rabbi, and he wanted to pray for me, and so, but he couldn't pray for me unless he had my Jewish name, and I didn't know it, and so we had to call my sister, and we had to trace things down, but a good friend of mine, Michael Patchen, always knows more about my past or anything than I do. I forget everything. He remembers everything, So he's kind of like my, the truth serum or something, you know, whether it really happened or not. But I think he makes up things anyway. But anyway, so he also was very involved in going to synagogue, and you know, he wants to get back to Israel and stuff. And so he talked to his rabbi in Wichita, and so his rabbi did research on my name and Lester, and found that Issachar was a translation. The had to do with the female part of it and male part of it, something like that. And so that was my Jewish. I found out that it was my Jewish name, and it had such a romantic sense to it, you know, Issachar, and it kind of took it. No one would have to know that,
Right.
you know,
right.
but it still gave a sense of drama to the title, I think.
It was, for me, it was interesting with the title, you know, of surveillance, and then me being at the show with the camera trying to film, get the reactions of people without them seeing me, you know, kind of like hiding, using other people to block,
Yeah.
you know, so I could get a real reaction. Because when people see a camera, they either duck out of the way, like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
or they'll like pose and like smile.
Right.
And, you know.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting, especially with that piece, with the light, filming people's reactions. You know, some people would like smile, like they would, you know, it was, you kind of wonder what they're thinking. Other people just
Right.
get kind of this like horrific look on their face.
Yeah.
But I think everyone had a slightly different reaction.
Take on it. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think that piece, I mean, I think the show as a whole was surprising for a lot of people.
Mm.
But I think that piece in particular, you know, as a contrast to the other works in the show, really seemed to sort of set up, in some ways, some sort of perplexing sorts of questions.
Right.
And I think that was very interesting.
Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to see the footage, I could show it to you.
From down there?
Yeah,
Sure.
I got it on the computer.
You got
Or if there's time.
good 35 minutes worth.
That's good. I mean, if you guys are done, I think I have enough.
Is there anything else you want
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think that
to
was
cover?
really good.
Yeah. That was pretty smooth.
Yeah.
We know each other too well.